Welcome back to the Astro Imaging channel. It's Memorial Day, so we do shout out for Memorial Day, honoring the people who have given their lives for I think it was the Civil War originally, and it's been going on since then. Um, Tonight, we've got a rather interesting show for all of us because, as I can see it, um, are we broadcasting? As Yeah, there we go. Um, the um, Tonight Nick is going to tell us something of interest to all of us because he's going to be talking about imaging and processing under bad weather conditions. And so we encourage you all to hang in there. And we're going to be talking about what you can get out of some bad imaging conditions. And I think you'll be very well informed about all this, and it'll be pretty cool. And I wanted to share my screen here and show you a few things. Share my entire screen, share it. And I'm going to go back over to, first off, upcoming shows. You'll notice that under upcoming shows, we no longer have the human-made list that we type in, but we instead have a Google Calendar. You can sign up to be on the Google Calendar, and when you're on the Google Calendar, you can get notices of when the shows are going to be and all those kinds of things. So tonight, as it says, Sydney from AstroBin Imaging and Processing under Mediocre Skies. Ken Sturrock checked in with us a little earlier while we were by email, and he is getting ready for the SkyX Professional, and he's going to cover a few other Mac pieces of software, but it's going to be mostly about the SkyX Professional. We know that many people out there want to know about, hey, how do I do Mac imaging and stuff like that? And so I think you might be interested if you're one of those. And the next week, the Astro Imaging community is going to present, and Eric is right now looking at, and we'll show you the workshop in a second here, but he's trying to figure out which people we want to have come on and show us some of their processing skills with Eric's collected data. We'll get to that. Bill Long is also in the room tonight. He's checking out his hardware and software and making sure that he can give his presentation about Voyager software. Ray Graylock is coming in. Carrie Ann, if you've ever seen her work, she does beautiful nightscapes. She's a hard person to catch up with. I think she's in Hong Kong or the Philippines right now giving a presentation. So you guys are going to get some of the best out of that. We're going to do another workshop next month, we think. These, I'm not sure Tolga has nailed them down yet, the 7th and the 28th. He had two people working on it, one about solar imaging so that we can get ready for the big Mercury transit, and the other about, I forget what it was about. Bill Lee, free and low-cost software. The main thing to look at here, guys, is that we do have a calendar and a Google Calendar, and you can put it in your collection of Google Calendars by going over there and just telling them you want to be part of the Astro Imaging channel Google Calendar. Let's look at the workshop for a minute. Eric, well, wake up, Eric, if you're out there, and turn your mic back.
I'm awake. Right, you have it up there. We have 13 submissions, really some excellent processing, and we're going to invite a few of you to come on and tell us, what you've done and how you've done it. And that's going to be on June, what is it? June 6th?
June 9th, I think.
June 9th.
9th.
And we'll be sending out invitations probably by next Sunday. And that's going to be probably the last day of submission. So get your submissions in there, and we will be sending out invitations. And just be prepared to very casually tell us how you came up with your image.
So you can see the images there. It always amazes me that with exactly the same precise set of data, we all make different decisions as to what we want to see, what we want to bring out. We all have different skill levels of bringing it out. This is all Eric's data, one set of data. Now, you want to know where to get that data? Go to Workshop Data right here. And you can, when you click that link, it will take you up to where you can find everything you need to find, all that data. Process it. Try to get it in by June 2nd. If you're going to process it later, that's fine. Just to get it in. But if we're going to invite you we want to give you some lead time to come in. Now, by the way, we're not looking for the best process. We're not looking for the best final image. We're looking for somebody who did something that we don't already know how to do. I would say 2/3 of these are pretty much strictly PixInsight works. Well, maybe there's some other things, or maybe you did something special with your PixInsight. You made some decisions, and we would want to talk to you about that. Okay, that's enough of that. That's enough of that. Where are we? Don't forget to, ooh, look at me. I'm an infinite regression. That's probably true. I've been in infinite regression most of my life. Let's go on over to Nick. And as soon as I can figure out how to get over to Nick. Nick, you there?
Yep, I'm here. Did you hear me?
Yeah. And are we presenting you to everyone? You go for it.
So I go to screen share, correct?
Yes, if you want to get your start your PowerPoint up.
Yeah, let's see. So can you see it?
I'm messing. I'm going to a different screen. No, not yet.
Not yet.
Up in the upper left-hand corner, the green.
Share.
Oh, Tolga joined us. Hi, Tolga.
Hi, Tolga. You see it yet?
There you are. Hi, Sydney. You're on.
Okay, so we're good.
Yeah, we're seeing your full screen as if it were a presentation, or at least we are here in the room. What are we doing out on the actual program? Oh, I messed that up. Go ahead. Present.
Is the video okay?
Yeah, I've got. It'll take me a few seconds to get there. Go ahead. Present.
Okay. Hi, everybody. So my name is Nick Pavelchak. I live in upstate New York, outside of the village of Altamont. And you may have seen me on AstroBin, Cloudy Nights, AstroMart. My username is Sydney, and my avatar is a picture of my dog, Tyga, and I use it on all 3 sites. So first of all, I want to thank Tolga for inviting me to present here today. And I also want to thank the Astro Imaging channel and acknowledge the work that they're doing. They're providing a valuable service to the Astro Imaging community. And just from my short time interacting here, I know that a lot of work goes on behind the scenes to make this all possible. So I just wanted to say thank you to the Astro Imaging channel for doing what they do. I am a research scientist by profession, but astronomy and astroimaging are some of my hobbies. So I try not to take this hobby too seriously, and I try not to get too technical in what I'm doing. So this presentation will be deliberately not very technical, but certainly if people want to discuss things in more detail, please interrupt and ask questions, and then we can explore issues as they come along. So, okay, so the next slide worked okay? Did everybody see it? Not hearing anybody.
Yeah, I'm sorry. Fine.
Yeah, we got to tell you that we mute ourselves so that we don't interrupt your presentation. And when you ask us a question like that, it takes us a second to get back on.
Okay, I'm paranoid because I have a very sketchy internet connection and I never know when it cuts out.
No, you're good.
So, okay, great. So just quickly a little background about me. So my presentation is imaging under mediocre skies because that's the only skies I've ever imaged under. That's all I know. I've been doing astronomy for about 35 years, but I've been imaging for the past 7 years. I live just outside of the capital district of New York, which is the cities of Albany, Schenectady, and Troy. So it's fairly light polluted, but one of my advantages is that I'm up on a cliff at about 1,200 feet, and most of the Capital District is 400 feet or below in elevation. So I get to be above some of the sky dome. According to the website Good to Stargaze, my skies are about a Bortle 4.3. I've never measured that. I think that might be a little optimistic. But so my eastern sky that faces the cities are very washed out. And so I try not to image to the east. But my western skies face more rural areas and are much nicer for imaging. Up here in upstate New York, our transparency is generally very hazy, humid. We really don't get crystal clear skies like I've seen when I've gone out west. I generally refer to our skies as being very fuzzy. And our seeing is probably typical of what most people experience, about 2 to 4 arc seconds. Occasionally we'll get a little better, and certainly occasionally we get a little worse. So that's what I have to deal with. And so next I'm going to show some of my images that I've taken in the last few years. And then what I'll do is I'll pick one, which will be the Galaxy M82, and walk through the processing steps that I typically use, the major steps. And the processing that I use has really been developed over through trial and error. So really what I can offer to everyone is really just what works, for me, and hopefully people might get some ideas from my imaging to apply to their images. So first is the tadpoles, which are a very popular object. NGC 7331 and part of the Deerlick group. And these are all taken with the C14 Edge telescope. The Bubble Nebula, M51. This is the Headphone Planetary Nebula, NGC 891. And then finally the Pillars of Creation. And this was a bicolor narrowband hydrogen and oxygen. I generally don't shoot sulfur, primarily because I have such a hard time getting enough data just for the hydrogen and the oxygen that I forego using sulfur in my images. So my equipment, I started out with a Teleview Ranger and a 12-inch Meade, but then more recently have purchased the Takahashi FSQ 106 for wide field imaging, and then the Celestron Edge for higher resolution work. I had been using an SBIG ST2000XM and more recently using the ST10XME, which is nice because it has a very high quantum efficiency, but it's also a non-anti-blooming gate camera. So I have to deal with bloom. So when I'm composing an image and determining exposure time, try to make sure that I'm not going to get any excessive blooms, and that any blooms that do occur will not impact any regions of interest within the image, so that it's really only affecting blank sky, so that I'm not losing any important information. I also purchased an Optec TCF focuser, which has been really great. I found manual imaging or manual focusing gets old very quickly. And with the Optec, I could reach good focus within a minute doing the run. And it's very repeatable. It's a very reliable and very accurate focuser. And then finally, one of my more recent purchases is a few years ago was I bought a new Astrophysics 900 mount. So that brings me to my next slide. So the real game changers for me in my imaging was one, purchasing the AP mount, because it has just performed flawlessly from the day I bought it. And so I could take the mount out of the equation when I have sub-exposures that are less than perfect. It's never been a problem with the mount. Sub-exposures for me are usually ruined by clouds passing through and affecting the image. And the other game changer was when I purchased an Explorer Dome and put it in my backyard. And so I think having a permanent setup, whether it's in your backyard or if it's a remote setup, is a really nice thing to have. We all know that the weather forecasts simply are not reliable. And so with a permanent setup, you could take advantage of those excursions of clear hours during an otherwise not so great night and capture some image when you otherwise would not have wanted to go out and set up everything to acquire an image. So you could quickly begin or end your imaging session. So if the weather suddenly starts to go bad, you simply shut the dome in my case, and I don't have to worry about any takedown. Nothing to set up or take down. I can maintain my camera orientation and my guide settings over extended periods. The dome provides a very effective wind block. I'm up here on this cliff, and we often get very howling winds. And unless the winds are just in the wrong direction, I could usually image even when it's very windy out, which is really nice. And the bottom line is I simply am able to image a lot more often than I could without the permanent setup. So it's really been a change for me for this hobby. I use 3 different types of software. CCD Soft to focus my optic focuser for guiding and for image capture. I use CCD Stack for all my image reduction, register stacking, removing the blooms from the camera, for doing my deconvolution, for combining my colors, doing an initial digital development processing stretch, and then all my post-processing is done in Photoshop. And I don't use PixInsight, which I'd like to try, but right now I'm just sticking with Photoshop. So I will talk about my process flow, but let me pause here. Are there any questions at this point?
I think you're okay. Eric, have you gotten anything out of the YouTube comments themselves yet?
Is it okay if I ask a question?
Yeah, go ahead.
Okay, so you mentioned the AP900 mount was a game changer for you. Do you use APCC and pointing and tracking correction models, or do you just use the standard V2 driver and tracking?
Yeah, I just use the standard. It's worked for me. And I may invest in the APCC, but at this point, I don't really feel the need to do it. One of the things when I'm imaging, I almost always set up another scope outside my dome for visual imaging. So I'm constantly checking the performance of the mount. And I like to keep things simple. So for me, I simply slew the scope to my object, orient the camera, set my guiding parameters, and good to go. So I haven't used APCC. Is it something you would recommend otherwise?
Lengthy discussion, yes, but if it's working well for you, that's awesome.
Okay. Yeah, I know it's a very nice feature to have, but can't buy everything, right? So
yeah,
I can choose what I spend my money on.
I should say that I've got an AP product also, and I do not use the APCC. I just have not found the need for it, so I'm doing fine without it.
Yeah, I think if I had a remote setup, then things may be different.
Terry from Australia here, you see his name down below there, is also on the comments from the chat room itself. It mentions that he doesn't use APCC either.
Okay.
So there. We'll have a big discussion on that someday.
Yep, that'd be a good idea.
Yeah. Okay.
But
Actually,
well,
if I'm not mistaken, Tolga, who has done a marvelous job of arranging speakers, is going to have George here in August, I think.
oh,
And George can tell us everything about APCC. George from Astrophysics.
yeah, George would be fantastic.
Okay. We've been working real hard on getting you guys presenters, so Tolga's done a marvelous job. Back to Nick.
Okay, so these are my bluebirds of happiness in my backyard. That was taken to the Takahashi. So also nice for nature photography. So this is my general approach to really processing, as well as composing, but processing. And this is nothing new. And you can look at this in a variety of ways. You could look at this in the spatial domain. You could look at this in frequency space. You could look at this in wavelet layers. But the general concept here is I divide up the image into at least 4 different layers. One is the sky background, which of course you want to be smooth, evenly illuminated, and not too noisy, but not so much noise reduction that it's plasticky. And then there's the low frequency, low detail, moderate signal areas like the outer arms of a galaxy or outer regions of a nebula. And there's the high detail areas, the high frequency signal areas, like the details in the spiral arms of a galaxy or the main subject components of an intricate nebula. Then there are the stars. And then there may be other structures and features in an image, such as background galaxies. But the general approach, and I think, I think we all do this either consciously or subconsciously to various degrees. But the general idea is that any processing step that I do is intended to impact only one of these layers and not the other. And so I rarely apply a tool universally to an image in post-processing. And so, of course, the way to do that in Photoshop is to use masks or the select tool or the color range tool. So you're really trying to isolate the application of the function to each specific layer. And of course, every image is different. And so the steps that you take and the strength in which you apply the tools is going to differ. And it depends on numerous factors, such as the signal to noise ratio of the structure, its detail, its spatial frequency, your personal goals and desired visual impact for the image. And the bottom line really is that there's always that balance between the object fidelity, faithfully representing the data that comes out of your camera versus how much aesthetic expression that you want to impart into that picture. And of course, there's no right or wrong answer to this. Some people like to have a very bold, aggressive approach. Some people like to keep it more subtle. And even if you look at some of the really well-renowned imagers, you'll see both sides of that spectrum represented. You'll see imagers that really put a lot of color and a lot of contrast into the images, and others who take a much more subtle approach. So it really depends on what you want, and also the specific image that you're working on and how you want to express that as your product, as your art image. So now I'll go through steps I've taken that I took to process M82. And so this really kind of highlights my imaging under mediocre skies theme here, because this was taken this winter when the polar vortex parked itself over the Northeast. and we had horrendously bad seeing. It was extremely windy, really howling winds for days on end. My winter set point for my camera was 25 below Celsius, and the temperatures during the vortex got colder than that. So I lost my regulated cooling for my camera. And then after I discarded 3 full nights of data because everything was just blobs, I decided I would focus the remainder of my time capturing luminance and the hydrogen alpha plumes from the galaxy. And I went back and I looked at an old picture that I took of M12, and I decided the color data from that old picture from 2014 was sufficient to use for my new image. So I did not capture any new RGB data. I simply used what I had that I had taken with my Me12 in 2014. So for this image, I have about 10 hours of luminance, a whopping 12 hours of hydrogen alpha, and then 6 hours of color data. So overall, it amounted to actually a lot of integration time. But I also discarded probably that much again of images. So it really was a lot of effort, took a lot of time during those conditions over this winter to get the data that I felt I needed to produce this image. And so talk about starting off with CCD stack. So this is just a cute picture. It was actually picked by APOD as one of the 20 notable submissions for the solar eclipse of 2017. My wife's doing a pinhole camera for the total solar eclipse, and my dog having a very different perspective about viewing the solar eclipse. So CCD stack, I do my calibration, at least 20 to 25 flats, darks and bias frames, bloom removal, registration and stacking, and deconvolution, which I think is always important to do it while it's in the linear state before you do any stretching. And then I use it to do a moderate DDP stretch. I try not to stretch it too much in CCD stack because other steps taken later on will further enhance the image. And so you don't want to bring out too much right now, and you want to resist the temptation to do a full stretch and to risk blowing out some of your details and your highlights as you proceed along. And one characteristic.
Nick,
Yep.
before you go on,
Yep.
there was a step before the actual processing. John at Astra wants to know if you use any software to segregate your good data versus your bad data. How do you choose which subs you're going to process?
I line them all up. I just load them all into CCD stack, and I sort them by full width half maximum. But then I just go through them one by one.
You're looking at them with your eyeball?
With my eyeball, right.
Yeah.
And so I reject them as I go along, and usually go through them twice. And then I may reject some later after when you go into normalization and you're doing the weighting of the imaging. Anything that's really sort of washed out and doesn't get a high weight, I may or may not discard as well. So the selection is really by how I think it looks.
Okay, so if I understood it correctly, you sort them out according to full width half max, so that they're in that kind of ranked order that way. And then you do, there's some kind of screen stretch going on in CCD stack, and you just eyeball them, and at some point you say, okay, that's it.
Right, that's exactly how it works. So CCD does an automatic screen stretching of the raw data.
Okay.
So
While we're at a break here, Eric, is there anything coming in from YouTube?
No, not yet, Alex.
Okay. Okay. Thanks a lot. Go ahead, Nick.
okay, thanks. So I will usually do at least 2 different deconvolutions in CCD stack. But what I wanted to point out is one nice characteristic of positive constraint in CCD stack. You can see here the background noise. This is actually a different image just to illustrate the point. But the background noise, is very pixelated, very noisy. And of course, the stars are soft. But if you do a low number of iterations in positive constraint deconvolution, it not only tightens up the stars, let me flip back and forth, but you can see it also smooths out the background. So generally, and if your stars are well sampled, it tightens them up nicely. But that's the critical component with deconvolution. You really need to be critically sampled or oversampled in order for the algorithm to have enough information in order to properly approximate a reproduction of the pre-convolved image. So, for example, with the Takahashi, where I'm shooting at 2.5 arc seconds per pixel, I won't do any deconvolution because it just really makes a mess. But with the C14, I'm shooting at a half an arc second per pixel, which is oversampled for my skies. But what I'll do is I will then use this low deconvolved image as my background layer, along with the stars. And you have to be careful because this could also smooth some areas that you don't want to smooth. So you have to inspect the image after you do this.
Can I interject with the question real quick?
Yep.
Yeah, so you mentioned that with the FSQ, which is this, the reason I'm asking the question is because it's a very, very popular telescope. So why specifically do you choose not to deconvolve images with the FSQ?
Well, it has to do also with the camera that I'm using. So the 10xMe has a pixel size of, I believe it's 6.8 microns. So the stars are not very well sampled when shooting with that combination, with that telescope. And so in order for deconvolution to really work properly, it needs to have a very good representation of the data. It needs to have a good sampling of the data in order to. It's an iterative process, right? That solves for an ideal. It tries to approximate what the point spread function of an ideal star would be compared to what is showing up in your image. So if your star is not well sampled, it has a very difficult time of doing that, of removing that convolution. And I just find that when I do that with the Takahashi, it just leaves a lot of artifacts, makes a mess, and I don't get good results from that. I find the image looks a lot worse after that. So I don't do the deconvolution. You have a different experience with that?
In PixInsight, yes.
Oh, you do? Okay.
Yeah. I've actually found that it's safe to do, but PixInsight has a very complex deconvolution algorithm, especially if you leave it up to the Richardson-Lucy algorithm to do its thing, which takes eons to dial in right. But I thought that was doubly pretty interesting to listen to. One, you're talking about the vantage point of what a lot of imagers are going to do, and that's to use a Photoshop or I assume you use Photoshop for this, right?
No, CCD stack.
Oh, CCD stack. Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think that's very, very, very interesting data point. Anyway, continue.
And what image scale are you shooting at with the FSQ? What's your pixel size of your camera?
So I don't actually use the FSQ anymore. I sold mine, but when I was imaging with it, I was right around two arc seconds per pixel.
Okay. All right.
Yeah.
I'm at 2.5, and yeah, like I said, I just find it does not improve the picture at all, and I get funny stars. So I will use that as the background for my image because it's a smoother background, and then again for my stars because they're a little tighter. And then I'll do more iterations of deconvolution for the higher detail and higher frequency areas. And of course, well, in my experience, when I do that, you get halos around stars. You get those negative values around stars as the deconvolution process sort of remaps the wings of the star, moves it inward. But then you could get, depending on the parameters you set and the version that you use, you could get these negative halo values, as well as other artifacts to the image. So I'll use the higher deconvolved areas selectively in those areas where there's an improvement, and then add it to the background areas using a mask, which brings us into Photoshop. So here's an example of combining the deconvolution layers in Photoshop. So I have my background, which seems pretty smooth. And then into the core of the galaxy, I will add the higher deconvolved layers. I usually use at least one higher layer, but in some cases you could actually do a middle layer, like for the lower signal areas. So you might have like 10 iterations for the background, maybe 20 for the lower signal areas, and then maybe 50 or 60 for the core of the galaxy. So you get that sort of gradation. But the biggest point to keep in mind is you want to avoid artifacts, because you could easily add artifacts with deconvolution, and that's certainly a mistake that I made a lot early on, where I would overly deconvolve images. And I think that's something that's also tempting for beginning imagers. I see all this data, this detail coming out of the image, and a lot of it is not real detail. It's just artifacts. The next thing that I will do is a high pass filtering of the core, the high detail areas to increase the contrast, using a layer, adjustment layer with a mask, selecting filter, high pass filter, using a soft light layer blend. You could also use an overlay blend, which is a little more aggressive. I usually don't use that. I use a soft light blend, and I'll do one layer at about 6 pixels for the really small structures, like the centers of the galaxy and the dark arms, and then for the larger structure areas, 16 pixels. And these are very strong as well, so you really need to dial down the opacity after you've done it. So you paint them, basically paint these adjustment layers into the core of your object, or any areas where you want to increase the contrast.
Have we lost Nick?
Yeah, I think we have. I was,
Hello, everybody. Nick was having problems with bandwidth in earlier times. So we don't know what's happening exactly. Have you guys got any questions over there that we can visit with you while Nick is trying to get back in?
no, nothing over in YouTube right now, Alex.
Okay. And it looks like Heidelberg Observatory has rejoined our video call.
Oh, hi. So where did I lose you?
Hi.
You were just doing the 2 layers of high pass filtering.
Okay, so I'll go over that again. You could do, I use a soft light blend, and you could use an overlay blend, which is more aggressive. I don't like it as much. And I do 2 different
Nick,
radii, one for the small
Nick,
structure. Yes.
be sure you're sharing your screen on your, when you came back in. I don't know if you turned on your screen share.
How do I get back there? Okay, hi. And share. You see it?
Not yet. Upper left-hand corner, the green box with the arrow. You click on it and share your entire screen,
Share.
and then click
It
share.
says you're sharing.
It says you're sharing.
How's that?
I'm still seeing, now I'm seeing a screen. Now I'm seeing it. Now it's good. Everything is wonderful. Our life continues.
Great. So, so the 6 pixel radius for the small structures and the 16 pixel radius for larger structures. So you blend that in with a brush, and it's very strong. So you need to lower the opacity after you've brushed in the areas that you want. But it really brings out the contrast in these high frequency, these high detail areas, and especially for things like galaxy cores or very high signal areas of nebula.
Nick, I have a question for you.
Mm-hmm.
Actually, 2 questions. Do you remove the stars before you do the high pass filtering so you don't get those really bright stars?
No, so what? Yeah, what you do here. I'm sorry. Go ahead.
And so, secondly, do you ever start off at a lower pixel value, say 1, 2, 3, 4, to try to get some of the fine detail?
As far as the stars, since I'm doing a layer mask, an adjustment layer with the mask, and then you do hide all, and you use a white brush, so then you simply paint in on those areas where you want to bring out the detail. So in this case, I'm not filtering the stars at all. I'm only filtering the core of the galaxy. So there's this mask. You can see my arrow over there. So does that answer that?
Yes.
And then I've tried lower, every object's different. So I've tried lower radius values. I find the 6 and the 16 work well for me for most of my images, but there are some images where I've gone higher or lower. So it's really a matter of trial and error for the image. But in this case, it was 6 and 16. That answer?
Yes, that's fine. Thank you.
Okay. And so I mentioned that for this image, since it was taken during the horrible polar vortex, I didn't want to spend time taking color data. So this is an old image from 2014, and right here is the 2014 J supernova, which is what I was shooting. This is an awful image. It's overly deconvolved, overly sharpened. Colors are kind of garish, overly saturated. I don't know what I did with the stars, but the main body of the galaxy, I was okay with the general color balance. So I decided to use the data from here as my color data for the core, and then my newly acquired hydrogen alpha for the hydrogen alpha streams here in M82. So when I added the color to the luminance, so that's the high pass filtered luminance, added it as a color layer. Using a mask, I removed the hydrogen, the red hydrogen streams, because I didn't want those anymore. And then blurred it to smooth out the color noise. And it's pretty amazing how far you could blur your color data and still have, a reasonable image. But the blurring is going to depend on, of course, how the quality of your color data. If you get a lot of confetti noise and things, you use a higher amount of blurring. For this picture, I blurred it quite a lot. So let me move forward. So this is the newly acquired hydrogen data. This is, I think what I said, 12 or 15 hours worth of data. And again, the polar vortex was wreaking havoc with me. So you could see these black little things, which were frost that accumulated on my sensor. And then because my image was much colder than my calibration frames, I got these artifacts here from column defects. But I didn't care about any of that because all I wanted from this image of the hydrogen was the jets, the streams around. So I was able to use this just as it is. And so the first thing that I did was I took that, I added a hue saturation layer, colorize, set my hue to red, saturation to 100, and lightness to -50, which is similar to what a lot of people do for when they're colorizing their narrowband data. So that's pretty straightforward. So then I added it to the colorized luminance data as a lighter color. And what's important here is to do a clipping mask, a levels clipping mask. What happens is when you add the hydrogen image to your luminance, you get a lot of the red in the dark areas that pollute the image. And so you don't want that. So you do a clipping layer and you raise the black point of the layer for the hydrogen so that you're removing that hydrogen from the dark areas of your image. And so you go right up to the histogram. Some cases maybe even a little past the base of the histogram. And then to bring out the hydrogen, the midpoints of the hydrogen, you lower your midpoint of your levels curve. And so this is also sort of trial and error, but it's actually a fairly simple process, and I find that it works pretty well for bringing out the hydrogen in the areas that you want it, and keeping it from polluting into the areas that you don't want it. Any questions on that? Because there's a lot of different ways that people blend hydrogen into images.
I see no real questions. I do have a disagreement from me that was,
Okay.
I do have a real, that was a real sucky image that you were describing a little while ago, your previous effort at this particular
Oh, you
galaxy.
didn't think it was bad?
I didn't think, well, meaning that I am sure that me and a whole lot of other folks out there would be glad to start with an image like that. Be glad to have work, that you have that image.
Yeah, I just thought it was overly processed.
Well, nevertheless,
Okay,
it's a
well,
good.
thank you. Okay, so the next thing I'll do is using the HDR toning tool in Photoshop. So, for real HDR toning, you use bracketed exposures of images, which certainly has an application in Astro Images. But Photoshop has this nice HDR toning tool to to give a simulated improvement in the tonal range, compressing the tonal range, and also adding sharpening into areas that you would like to enhance. So there could be, you could do a whole session just on the HDR toning tool. But I only use two different parameters in here. One is the edge glow radius, which sets the size of the tool. But basically, what it does is it defines the detail, how much sharpening, the frequency area of the detail sharpening. So this is a trial and error. For this one, I used a radius of 12. For different images, I'll use anywhere from 2 to 20, depending on the area that I want to add some additional sharpening. And the other part of the tool that I use is the toning curve, which was similar to general curve tool, but it seems a little more sensitive. The first thing I'll do is lower the white point, because at its default, the HDR toning tool really blows out the highlights. So you want to bring that down, and then you could control click on different areas within your image to set anchor points within the curve, and then areas that you want to either increase or decrease the brightness within the image. So this is the curve that I selected for this image. I have tried many times to reuse settings from previous images for my new images just to save time, because especially the toning curve, it's a lot of trial and error. And I have never been successful in doing that. I found that every image needs unique settings for the toning curve, as well as the edge radius. So this is a little time consuming, but as you use it more, it gets a little easier to use. The one thing that I've never liked about this is you get star bloat. So what I do is I do a color range select of the entire image, but omitting the stars, and then paste that onto the previous non-HDR toned image that I saved, so which is this. So I get the benefits of the toned areas within the galaxy, but without having to accept those bloated stars. So there's lots of different ways, of course, that you could blend this, but I find this just the easiest way for me to do it, just to select everything but the stars and then paste it onto the previous version of the image. Okay, so we good so far?
Good here. I think Eric's okay too. Eric?
There are a couple of comments, but I don't see any questions.
Okay, like good. comments that I want to hear?
Oh, let's see. Matthew Ray, same here. Normally it's part of my Monday morning commute. Thankfully, tomorrow is a holiday. I don't know what that means exactly.
Probably just glad to be here and live so that he can actually make comments. Because we'll get about 40 or 50 people watching live, and we'll run about in the course of the next week, we'll have 650 to 800 people have watched the show. So many of the people don't get a chance to make comments live, or maybe it's a completely different thing. I just like my explanation better.
Just happy to be enjoying the
Yeah.
holiday weekend. It's always nice. So,
Okay.
so again, the toning curve is really just a way of fine tuning your highlights, your midtones, and your shadows, so that you're bringing them out to the degree that you want to bring them out. Is sort of a simple way of explaining it. So you can see the difference from that to that. So it's a much more punchy image, and especially with the dimmer areas, really bringing those out. And then to bring it out further, and this is a very selective way of highlighting dim areas and increasing contrast in areas such as spiral arms or other high frequency areas with a lot of contrast to them. You make two new adjustment layers. One you set as a soft blend, and the other you set as a screen blend. And then you do a mask hide all, and then you use a white brush at a very low opacity, about 14% is what I use, and a soft brush. And then you just gently brush in using the screen layer, dim areas that you want to lighten up some more, and using the soft light areas that you want to increase the contrast. And you could, this is another one you could really go overboard, but the beauty is you can then switch to a black brush and remove if you think you've done too much. And certainly the opacity setting is a big factor. If you've done too much, you just scale it back. So we could see the difference. This is from the HDR, and then to this newer version. We could see, especially the perimeter of the galaxy, I was able to bring out a lot of those dim, faint areas, as well as in the upper and lower areas of the hydrogen plumes. Then I'll usually do, depending on whether I think it needs it or not, a very light sharpening using the Smart Sharpen tool in Photoshop. But one of the reasons I like to use this is because it also has this noise reduction feature to it. And you could use it at a low percentage. It's very gentle. But often this is all the noise reduction. If I've acquired good data, this is all the noise reduction I really need to do. And it's just very mild. And this, again, you could apply it universally. You could apply it selectively using masks. In this case, I did apply this one universally. And the difference is subtle. You really have to kind of enlarge the image to really hone in on what it's done. But it was a very slight improvement. So I went ahead and did it. And again, with all of these tools, you want to make sure that you're not creating any artifacts, sharp lines that shouldn't be there, sharp lines between your light and bright areas that are artifacts. After that, this is where I crop the image, and this could be a whole nother session just on cropping. But there's the rule of thirds where you divide the image into 3 rows and 3 columns, and Photoshop does this for you. And the general principle is that at each of the 4 corners of intersection, you you want roughly where your areas of interest and detail are. So you see so many pictures that, like great galaxy pictures, but the galaxy's down here in the lower third quadrant, and the rest of the picture is mostly empty sky. So it's a great picture, but because of the way it's cropped and composed, it really loses a lot of the visual impact. So cropping is really, I think, an underestimated but very important aspect to how we um, display our images. I always try rotating and flipping to see if that might give a nice visual impact. You know, you want a balance to the picture. It shouldn't look awkward. It have sort of a natural flow to it. And your eye should move comfortably through the picture. So when you have something just off in the corner somewhere on its own, it just kind of feels awkward, and it really loses that visual impact. So I think it's important to spend time on that final composition and cropping. And you know, we hate to crop out things from our images because we work so hard to get them. But sometimes cropping, it really makes a difference between an okay picture and one that really stands out at you. So I would just say, don't be afraid to crop. And if you crop too much and you don't like it, you could always go back. But it's good to experiment with the cropping and get examples of the different visual impacts that you can get from your image.
Nick, another question has come up. Matthew said, do you ever use Lightroom? Now, I don't use it myself, but I know other people that do.
No, I've never used Lightroom. I'm not even sure exactly. I mean, I know roughly what it is, but I don't know exactly what it is. Is there anybody that could explain it briefly?
No, I have the same opinion. I have no idea what it really does.
What Lightroom does?
Yeah.
Well, Lightroom is used by a lot of photographers who have a set of images that they've taken that they want to apply the same processes over and over and over again. I think that if you were here, is it July 31st or June 3rd? I don't remember exactly, but I could look it up. When Kelly or when Carrie Ann gets here, she uses Lightroom a lot, and it is of value to us. Photoshop, it's got a subset of the material or subset of the programs, subset of the tools that Photoshop has, but it is it's I don't think any of them go quite as deep. And incidentally, Photoshop can also get a set of parameters and apply them to many different photos. So Carrie's going to tell us more about it. I'm not sure she's going to tell us about the first time. I've asked her to be here 3 times on 3 different presentations. So we'll get a chance to see that. As Terry has pointed out, Lightroom operates on a more global scope. It doesn't focus on so much one picture at a time, as it allows you to make changes to one picture and copy those to other pictures, as well as make changes to each individual picture as you go. But that's where its real strength comes in. And it's got a tremendous file system behind it and stuff like that, so you can, a pro photographer can keep track of where everything is a lot better.
Yeah, and I could see how that could have applications for certain types of astroimaging, certainly.
Yeah, right. It's just that Photoshop itself is more dedicated. I mean, it's got more powerful tools all the way through. And you're listening to somebody right now who hasn't used, except for getting to know how to use it and process a bunch of nightscapes and things like that. No, I don't use it all that much anymore. And it's been a few years since I've been really familiar with it. They may have come up with other tools and made it even more powerful.
Okay.
Nick, there's another question here. It says, can you change colors with this selective color tool?
Yes. I didn't include a slide for that, but I use the selective color tool a lot. It really helps to really fine tune some of the colors in very specific areas of an image. I did not need to use it for this one, but certainly for other images where there may be a little bit of a green cast somewhere, or especially magenta, like magenta stars in narrowband images and things like that. There's a bit of a learning curve to it for how it works. But I find it very helpful when the picture color looks generally okay, but it could be better. The hue saturation tool seems to be a little too crude in many cases, but the selective color is nice and subtle and gives you a lot of different options. So I find that a great tool for just fine tuning, really on a local level within the picture, different structures and elements. And again, especially for narrowband, but also for galaxies as well. If you have a cast and you want to modify it somewhat. Does that answer question?
I think it does.
Okay, so yeah, I love the select color tool, but in this image, I did not need to use it. So at the end is when I add my star colors, and for this image, I actually during the vortex did take the time to take short RGB exposures of the stars. I think I took like 10-second exposures in each color. The other alternative is to take your original RGB and just stretch it enough to bring out the star colors, but not so much to blow out the colors and get white stars. So it's a little bit of fine tuning of the stretching. But I find taking separate RGB exposures is a better way to go if you have the time to do it. So then I add them in, so just the colors, and I usually add it as a layer blend. And sometimes you get confetti or just colors that aren't very as smooth as you would like, so you could do a Gaussian blur to blur them up. And then I use the vibrance tool if I want to enhance the colors further than what I have. And I know a lot of people like to have really strong colors, star colors in their images, and some have it softer. So you have that. So you have that option. I usually, depending on the image, sometimes you want the stars to take a more subtle back sort of supporting role, like this with the galaxy. But if you're doing obviously some other pictures with open colors and nebula, you might the colors to have a more vibrance to them and be part of the more main cast of the picture. So you have that option when you take separate colors, and then you have the option of presenting them how you would like. And then finally is cleanup. A lot of people hate to do this because it's tedious, but you spend all that time doing all this with the picture, you might as well finish it up, so that anybody who really zooms in is not going to find any problems, any artifacts. So I zoom it way in, usually 400 times. So you want to clean up any blemishes, stray marks, and also you often have rough edges from when your picture, maybe because of other issues through your processing, you get really rough edges. So you can see here, the lower half of the picture was the before of the upper edge of this image. The upper half of this picture is the after of that upper edge of the picture. So I usually use clone stamp to get rid of like blemishes, the blur tool to any sort of confetti edges to maybe like your background galaxies or your stars to just kind of soften that up. The last resort, of course, is the crop tool. If you can't fix an edge, you simply need to crop it out. But I hate to do that. So I usually try to smooth it out or clone stamp it so that it looks clean and smooth. And so you can see the difference here. And this is the final image after going through all those steps. And so the final thought that I want to leave everyone with, we all spend a lot of time taking a lot of pictures, a lot of images. We all criticize our images. We're probably our own worst critics. But the fact of the matter is, you never know who's going to like your image. This was actually the first image that I've ever taken that I would kind of liked. And it was the first image I ever submitted for Astronomy Picture of the Day. I didn't think it was going to be selected. I simply wanted to see if I would get some comments from people. I was early on in my imaging, and I was hoping to get some constructive criticism from people. Then after I submitted it, I forgot about it. And then 2 weeks later, my wife wakes me up, and she says, "You got an email from somebody named Marge at Astrophysics congratulating you on your APOD." So I was thrilled. I was surprised. Certainly there's better pictures than this. And I've taken pictures that I like, or images that I like a lot better than this. But the fact is, somebody liked this one, and it got picked as the Astronomy Picture of the Day. And since that was selected, I got a lot of emails from people asking if they could use it. It's been used in journal articles by some NASA scientists. It's been on different web pages all over the world. It's gotten me a lot of attention. And so it's really nice, and it was unexpected, and it's very thrilling. And so all I could say is, if you have reservations about your image, you just never know who's going to like it and where it's going to take you. So that's my.
Okay, thank you, Nick. We do have a question, and Eric may have some questions also. John at Astra wants to know, how do you maintain good guiding with windy conditions? Your stars look pretty round. Did deconvolution straighten the things out, or what happened?
No, that's where the dome comes in. The dome only has the slit that.
Where'd you go? Did you guys lose?
Yeah, I think we've lost him.
Come on back, Nick. Okay, Nick, Eric, did you have other questions over there?
Well, there was one more question, but we need Nick
Yeah, we got to wait.
to answer it. Nick, are you there?
No, it sounds just like the last time. You just got to go back and get it.
Yeah, he'll be back.
He'll be back. Folks, get in your questions here as we're going along. Again, I remind you to head over to the workshop area on our website. I don't know if I'm probably going to mess everything up trying to get us back there and share my screen and everything, but we'll spend some time here while we're waiting for Nick. Oops. First off, we need to get back to me, and I need to share my screen. Yeah, that's what the screen looks like. It gets really confusing when you're trying to manage all these screens at once. Now I got to go find. There it is.
Yep. You got me?
Back, Nick. Nick, are you back?
Hi. Where did I leave?
Okay, hang on. I'm going to stop screen sharing. And I'm going to turn you back on. Don't forget you need to be screen sharing if you're going to show us from the screens, but you may be just shooting the breeze at this point. Okay, Nick, you had a question, which I've subsequently lost over here someplace. Eric, you ask your question, okay?
Yeah, there was a follow-up question. The first one was about the selective color tool, and after that, Ray asked, compared to PI color saturation, is this better? But you're not really a PI user, are you?
No, not at all.
I would say that it's not better or worse. I think you have more fine control with CC, with Photoshop, than you do with PixInsight, but that may be a matter of experience, not of actual ability of the tool.
Yeah, and I know PixInsight is highly regarded, and so I'm sure that either one could get you really great color. It's just a matter of learning within those different programs.
Yeah, and the way you go about it in PixInsight is completely different than you would in Photoshop.
Okay.
Okay, does that bring us to the close for the night? I remind you all to go back to the workshop. You got some beautiful data there. We are also lining up some data for you for next month. We're going to go south of the equator, and Terry's going to be presenting us with some southern object. I don't know if Terry's decided which one yet, but he's nervously trying to figure out which one would be good and present everybody a real cool challenge. So that, I believe, will conclude it for the night. We're going to be checking out. Did we get all the questions answered, Eric? I think we got everything out of the Rumble Talk.
Yeah, I think we got everything out of YouTube. I don't know about the other side.
Okay, I got my side. Rumble Talk's done. Thank you very much, Nick, for being with us tonight. And hang in there. We're going to go back to the room. But everybody else got to go. We got to stop the broadcast here. So good night, everybody. And I hope you have a good time. And goodbye.
Thank you.
Hey.